For more than 100 years, humans were known across the stars not as warriors or conquerors, but as peacekeepers. While other species built fleets and fought over planets, humans came with words and wisdom. They had no great empire, no vast armies, and yet they were everywhere, in every conflict zone, every broken treaty room, every planet torn between war and hope. When the Krell Dominion fought the icebound Draxil, it was humans who stood between them. When the Siraxi hive nearly consumed 3 worlds in their expansion, it was a human ambassador who calmed their queen with soft words and honest eyes. Slowly, the galaxy accepted that humans were useful, not dangerous, too kind for conquest, too careful to be a threat. That's why, when the quiet planet of Veltharin became the latest flashpoint between 2 of the most feared alien powers, the cold-blooded Krell and the insect-like Siraxi, it was only natural that the Galactic Council sent a human team to keep the peace. At the head of this mission was Ambassador Lydia Vance, a woman known for her gentle voice and unwavering calm. Her team landed with no weapons, only medical crates, negotiation tablets, and solar tents. The alien races greeted them with suspicion, but allowed them to set up their base near the disputed zone. From orbit, it looked like just another effort by the humans to stop a war before it started. But under Veltharin's cracked, dry soil, something ancient had waited in silence. Long ago, before the galaxy had noticed humans, before Earth had even joined the Council, a hidden operation had taken place on this very world. The mission had vanished from records, the buildings buried under ash storms, and all that remained were strange black stones half swallowed by dust. At first, the human team didn't say anything about it, not even to the Council. Lydia Vance simply ordered a quiet scan of the surrounding terrain, then requested supplies that didn't match a peacekeeping mission: hardened drones, long-range signal jammers, mineral processors. Her requests were approved without much attention. After, all humans were trusted, and they never asked for much. Meanwhile, the Krell and Siraxi continued to inch toward war. Their armies moved closer every day. Spies went missing. Patrols found themselves jammed or blinded. Each side blamed the other. The tension grew heavy. In the council halls above, alien diplomats praised the humans for keeping things from exploding. But on Veltharin, something else was happening. At night, locals reported low humming beneath the ground. Strange lights flickered near old cave systems. The human team never denied it. They simply smiled and said it was local weather. But deep in her command tent, Lydia Vance was reading data older than the council itself. Data marked with Earth's original colonization codes, lost for over a century. She said nothing to her staff, only moved markers on her map with careful thought, like setting up a board game. She knew something the galaxy had forgotten. Humans hadn't always been diplomats. There had been a time once when Earth had fought in the dark corners of space, quietly, without fanfare, without witnesses. Veltharin had been one of those shadows. Now it was waking up. The Krell watched the humans closely, confused by their calm. The Siraxi hissed and waited, unsure whether to strike. Neither side knew what was buried beneath them. Neither side knew that the humans, the so-called fragile ones, had returned not to prevent war, but to remember something lost. Lydia Vance stood outside her tent one evening, watching the stars. Her face was still soft, her hands still steady, but her eyes had changed. She whispered something to herself, words no translator could catch, then turned back to her command board. The peace would not last, but for the first time, it didn't need to. This time, the humans were not here just to talk. They were here to watch and prepare. The morning of the Peace Summit on Veltharin began with an unusual stillness. The air was dry, the skies a soft gray, and both the Krell and Siraxi delegations arrived with more guards than usual. Each side sat across from the other in the ancient stone hall, humans had restored for the talks. Ambassador Lydia Vance stood in the center, calm as always, her voice steady as she welcomed everyone. She had spent years solving conflicts just like this: accusations, threats, delays. It was nothing new, but something felt different. The Krell opened the summit by accusing the Siraxi of launching a cyber attack on their orbital supply ships. The Siraxi Queen's envoy responded coldly, claiming that Krell warships had been spotted cloaked near one of their hives. The room grew tense with each word. Lydia listened quietly, asking soft questions, trying to pull the truth from the fire. Her aides moved between delegates, exchanging reports and collecting data. But then, just before the second session began, the explosion happened. A Siraxi drone, one of their small scout models, flew in low and suddenly burst into a bright ball of flame near the human consulate. The shock waves shattered glass and threw people to the ground. When the dust cleared, 2 human aides lay motionless, their bodies still and broken beneath a collapsed wall. The Krell guards jumped to alert. The Siraxi shrieked in alarm, claiming the drone was never armed. The Krell shouted that it was a deliberate act of violence. Human medics rushed in, pulling the injured away. And yet, through all the noise, Lydia Vance did not shout. She did not accuse. She stood at the edge of the blast zone, her face still calm, but her eyes were no longer soft. They were cold, sharp, studying everything in silence. The Galactic Council, watching from orbit, praised the humans for their restraint. No weapons drawn, no diplomatic outrage, just a moment of grief and continued discussion. But behind the scenes, something had changed. Lydia closed her tent that night and locked the systems with a code older than any used by Peacekeepers. In the shadows of the planet, deep below the surface, something ancient had felt the impact. The vibrations of the explosion traveled down through the layers of rock until they reached a black chamber hidden for over 100 years. There, a quiet signal blinked red for the first time since it was buried. The system powered up slowly, dust falling from forgotten machines. Then a voice, calm, synthetic, echoed in the dark. Protocol Rex activated. Retaliation event Xenos. Identity match confirmed. Human presence. The old AI, part of a long-lost Terran outpost, began scanning the surface, reading new data, watching old enemies. It remembered war. It remembered the last time humans fought not with words, but with hidden weapons and perfect silence. On the surface, Lydia began issuing new orders. Her staff didn't question them. They moved the remaining equipment closer to the ruined valley nearby. They installed sensor jammers near the Siraxi perimeter and shut off communication lines that once fed updates to the Council. When asked, they gave simple answers. Security checks. Atmospheric testing. But even among her team, there were whispers now. The look in Lydia's eyes, the way she stared at maps longer than needed, the new code locks on her private terminal, these were not actions of a grieving diplomat. These were steps taken by someone waiting for something. Across the planet, both alien factions prepared for war, thinking they were only watching each other. They had no idea what was under their feet. They had no idea that the humans, the ones they called soft, were awakening a forgotten power built not to negotiate, but to eliminate threats before they ever became wars. And while the Council waited for peace, Lydia stood alone in the dark, her fingers brushing over a hidden console, her voice low and calm as she said, "We tried peace." The skies above Veltharan grew crowded as the Krell fleet moved closer in tight formation, their dark ships blocking out the stars like slow-moving shadows. On the ground, the Siraxi began building artillery nests across the rocky ridges, their spiny machines clicking into place with mechanical precision. Each side watched the other closely, waiting for the first mistake, the first spark to set off the storm. The planet sat under quiet tension, like a breath being held. And through all of this, the humans remained still. Their tents stayed where they were, Their peace flags still flew. From the outside, it looked like humanity was doing exactly what it had always done, standing between two enemies, trying to keep the peace. But far from the cameras and council eyes, human ships were making quiet moves. Small vessels began adjusting their positions across the system, slipping between asteroid belts and moons. They launched mining drones that dug deep into rock no one else had touched, extracting materials unknown to most alien scanners. When questioned, human officials called it a standard resource run to support peacekeeping outposts. The council, trusting as always, accepted the answer. But the truth was different. Something ancient had been hidden in those belts long ago. Materials designed not for diplomacy, but for activation of forgotten systems. In orbit, Council spies began noticing strange signals passing between human ships. The codes were heavily encrypted, unlike anything used for normal communication. After days of effort, a single message was decrypted, and its contents sent chills through even the most hardened intelligence officers. The message was short and precise. "Prepare the garden. The harrow begins." No one understood what it meant, but it didn't sound like peacekeeping. Meanwhile, back on Veltheran, a Krell scout team was sent to investigate old ruins near the southern canyons. They had picked up unusual heat readings underground, along with low-frequency pulses that made their equipment flicker. The team moved in slowly, their steps careful across the cracked stone and dry earth. At first, all they found were pieces of black metal, smooth, clean, untouched by time. Then they saw the towers. Rising out of the ash like ancient monoliths, the towers stood in a perfect circle, black steel humming softly, unmarked by any known species. No doors, no windows, no signs of function. Yet power flowed through them. The last image the scouts sent was a wide-angle shot of those towers under the red sky, their forms too perfect, too deliberate. Moments later, the feed went dark. The Krell demanded answers. The Siraxi claimed no knowledge. The humans, when questioned, simply said they hadn't been near that zone. But within the human command tent, Lydia Vance was watching everything. The black towers were part of an old human defense grid, one buried in silence and erased from history. Now it was waking up. Her staff had already begun the quiet reactivation process, powered by the materials their ships had mined. In secret, chambers beneath the peace station, old systems were returning to life. Silent drones reawakening, auto factories humming softly as they rebuilt forgotten machines. Lydia didn't share these details. She continued to meet with alien leaders, still offering smiles and gentle advice. But at night, she reviewed schematics from another era, sent private orders to off-world bases, and updated a file labeled only Operation Harrow. The Council still believed the humans were neutral. The Krell and Siraxi thought them weak. Even Lydia's closest staff didn't know how far the plan had gone. But the silence between the growing tension had become something else. Something with weight. It wasn't just a pause before a war. It was a countdown. The humans weren't trying to stop the storm anymore. They were making sure it broke in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time. And when it did, the galaxy would finally understand what humanity had become. Not diplomats, not warriors, but something much harder to see and far more dangerous. The day began with noise, alarms blaring across the Siraxi outer patrol line, as Krell warships moved out of formation and launched a full strike on a supply convoy. Plasma beams lit up the sky, and explosions rippled across the dry plains of Veltharan. The Krell had decided that enough was enough. They believed the Siraxi were arming secretly, preparing to ambush, and they weren't willing to wait. The humans, they thought, would stay quiet as always. Observers in orbit expected more of the same. Humans stepping in after the damage to clean up, talk, and calm everyone down. But what happened next wasn't in any report, and it wasn't in any plan written by the Council. Without a single warning, the sky changed. Shadows moved where there had been empty space. Human ships, once believed to be peaceful cargo vessels or observation drones, shimmered and then turned dark, sharp, and terrifying. These were not supply ships. These were warcraft, built in hidden shipyards far from any known map. They had no markings, no names, just black hulls and perfect silence. The first strikes were quick. A flash of red light crossed the sky, and the Krell flagship, a vessel the size of a city, suddenly went dark, its engines frozen, its weapons systems melted inside their own frames. Siraxi artillery on the hills began to power up, but before a single shell was launched, explosions bloomed from beneath them. The ground shook as underground charges, placed weeks ago by human teams pretending to scan soil, detonated with perfect timing. Krell fighters tried to regroup, sending calls for help across the system, but their signals were blocked. Communication towers fell. Satellites blinked out. Entire fleets found themselves blind and cut off. In the confusion, one galactic council ship, still floating in neutral space, sent a final broadcast before its systems shut down. The transmission was short, shaky, and ended in static, but the last words were clear. They weren't peacekeepers. They were waiting, watching, learning, and now they hunt. On the ground, chaos erupted. Krell and Siraxi soldiers, who had feared each other, now feared something else, something they never expected from the humans. The Peacekeepers had become hunters. Human operatives, long disguised as medical techs and aid workers, removed their fake identities and activated weapons no one had seen before. Drones flew low and silent through dust storms, targeting enemy leaders with quiet precision. All of it was fast. No speeches, no warnings, no mercy. In the old war chamber, where Krell and Siraxi diplomats once shouted over peace terms, Ambassador Lydia Vance stepped through the heavy door without a word. Her old uniform, hidden beneath the soft cloth of her ambassador robes, now showed its true face, jet black with silver lines, marked with an old Earth symbol that hadn't been seen in over 100 years. As she walked past stunned guards, she dusted off the shoulder patch and revealed the truth. Terran Strategic Command. The name was whispered only in old reports, long erased, long denied. She reached the center of the chamber and looked around, at the leaders of both alien powers, who now stood frozen with fear and disbelief. Her voice was low, steady, with none of the warmth she had used before. "We gave you time," she said. "We gave you peace. You chose war, so we remembered who we were." Outside, the sky continued to burn, but the human ships moved like a single thought, not random, not wild, controlled, planned, cold. These were not the humans the galaxy had come to know. These were not diplomats. These were something older, something deeper, something that had hidden behind kindness for a century, waiting. Now the mask was off, the peacekeepers were gone, and the killers had woken. In less than 2 days, the battlefield on Veltharan fell silent, not because of any signed treaty or diplomatic agreement, but because both the Krell Dominion and the Siraxi Hive had no choice. Their fleets were broken, their weapons useless, their leaders scattered and confused. The war they thought they controlled had slipped out of their hands before they even realized it. And the ones who had ended it, the humans, had not done it with rage or chaos, but with cold precision, planned movements, and quiet force. It was not an invasion. No banners were raised, no demands were made. And yet, Veltharan was now theirs. Not because they took it by power, but because it had always been part of something older, something hidden. Beneath the surface, the ancient human AI finally reached full activation. Lights pulsed across the black towers in the southern canyons, and deep channels under the soil opened to reveal old machines long buried in the dust of forgotten wars. The AI, known only by a number, began transmitting old tactical logs, files from a conflict no one in the modern galaxy remembered. These logs spoke of the First Galactic War, a hidden conflict that predated the Council itself. A war humanity had fought alone, long before they became known as Peacekeepers. A war so complete, so silent, that no record remained because humans had removed the witnesses. The truth shattered many assumptions. The Council gathered in emergency session, confused and shaken. How could this have happened? How had the humans fooled them all? But when they,